Good morning. You guys can do better than that. Good morning. That's so much better. And I have two people that are shills in the front row. I just want to disclose that ahead of time. Welcome to our first session, I think, live together in 2 years. It's going to be 4 views on PropTech and how it impacts corporate real estate and FM. Very happy to be joined by Ted Mort with Zealous, Susan Ah with Cushman & Wakefield, Daniel Stonecipher with Schneider Electric, and Colette Temick with Blue Sky IBE. There's something that binds us all together. We're all part of the IT community of IFMA, and we're all on the board of the IT community of IFMA. And we had a lot of fun last night, so I just had to throw that in. How many people belong to a community or a council? That's pretty good, about half. Awesome. So the IT community used to be a council. We've been around for about 21 years now. And really, we've been doing the same thing for about 2 decades, which is answering one question. How does technology support corporate real estate and facility management? And what's been fun about this adventure over the last couple of decades is the answers have changed because the technology's changed. We want to collaborate. We want to share. I was talking to the president of the Utility Council last Thursday in Phoenix, Arizona, and we're going to be doing a joint webinar in November based on what does the utility market need? How are they challenged? So that's kind of what we do. About 5 years ago, we organized a new group to be aligned with the technology community called BETA, the Built Environment Technology Alliance. Colette is my co-chair, whereas the IT community really looks at current best practices, what do we need today or helps people retire legacy technology, BETA was formed to look at the future. And we've been doing some fun things. Obviously, the pandemic kind of interrupted some of our plans, but BETA is looking at the future, what's coming at us 1, 3, and 5 years down the road. I know about half the people raised their hands. I'm going to kind of skip through this, but if you are a member of a council or community in the audience today, tell someone else at World Workplace about your council or community. I still think we don't get enough visibility in terms of the incredible collaboration that's available across all geographies, for our membership. Whether it's focusing on our core competencies from the community side, or looking at the verticals that are represented by our councils. Want to say thanks. The pandemic, like almost every other chapter and council and community, got hit. We took a membership hit, and we've grown back by 40 members. We went from 250 down to 180. We're back to 220. But we had an interesting thing happen, something unique that I haven't seen happen in any other component, is we went from having members in over 20 countries to over 33. Why? I think people are really focused right now on what to do with technology, how it's going to help us get through this next phase of moving past the pandemic. But we did not have any members in Africa. We have members in Africa now. We didn't have any members in Australia. We do now. South America was very, very lightly represented, and look at that map. We grew. We may not have grown a huge amount, but we did grow with subject matter experts in different parts of the world that give us, I think, a better voice to support membership globally. Thanks to sponsors. Appreciate them always. We have been busy. We've just been doing it virtually. And I think, having dinner last night and going through, hey, we're here doing this for the first time in 2 years. It's kind of cool. I mean, we're kind of getting our groove back, but we have been very active over the last 24 months. Since you're here, I'm going to give you the trick on this. So in collaboration with GEFMA, about 10 years we started a translation set for the first published version or print version of Facility Manager's Guide to Information Technology. We released our first Kindle edition 2.5 years ago. And we just released Learning Series Module 1 on Kindle last week. If you're an Amazon Prime member, guess what? You can download these books and get this knowledge for free. So this is a give back, not just to our community, but to membership and the profession as a whole. On that note, let's talk. We want this to be interactive. I realize we're in this huge cavernous room. Don't be shy. We'll give everybody a few minutes to kind of talk about a little bit on one of the topics, but we would like to know what you guys want to talk about. So the gist of IT, or the gist of it, workplace technologies, IoT and sustainability, VDC, BIM, owner-occupier involvement, pretty important, and articulating needs in a changing environment. And goodness knows we have been living through a changing environment. So I thought this morning to shift things just a little bit from what we talked about, guys, is let's start from the building process to getting ready to manage, to workplace technologies, to challenges. So Ted Mort, I'm going to start with you. Would you like to share a little bit about VDC and BIM? I mean, what it is, and how you've seen things, change over the last couple, 3 years?
Well, absolutely. The last 3 years has been a tremendous amount of change in BIM and VDC, not necessarily from the perspective of technological advancement, but more from adoption, right? We heard the speakers earlier in the keynote addressing this embracing of remote working and the hybrid type engagement. Construction in general is very old school. Right, we like to work on 2D drawings, we like to have people in the field, we like to have meetings in the job trailers, and it's taken a lot, an epidemic, to bring us to a point where we feel more comfortable working remotely and embracing those video conference calls. What that's done is really empowered us to leverage the virtual construction process, virtual design process, bringing stakeholders in, getting them more involved, where typically that hasn't been the case. I want to go back just a little bit with VDC and BIM and explain for a moment what that means for construction, just very briefly. VDC is virtual design and construction. It's the process of creating what you're used to seeing on the 2D drawings in a 3D, almost video game type environment. And this is involving everyone from the pre-planning architects, all the way through your civil engineering where they're putting pipes in the ground. The purpose of VDC is really to go through and empower the teams to recognize conflict during the construction process virtually before they experience it physically. Now, this being the ultimate objective, it allows them then to have a higher level of confidence in the design of the systems, which then empowers them to embrace things like off-site prefabrication. You embrace things like off-site prefabrication, it rolls into fewer people on the workspace, shorter periods of time, better risk management. So you can see that it's a waterfall that cascades through the construction process. BIM is a component within virtual design and construction. BIM is building information modeling. Building information modeling is the creation of that virtual environment based on information. So they call it parametric. It's instead of designing a box, starting with a box, you understand what that box represents, provide the inputs, those inputs then present themselves in a 3D representation. So building information modeling is almost a process that exists within VDC. There is a tremendous amount of opportunity from owners right now, especially within the FM community, to gain value out of this. When we talk about the information within BIM, that information is a consumable item on the back end. The challenge that we faced in construction is that we haven't opened that communication, that conversation with facility managers to understand how we can change what we do at the beginning to allow you to leverage that information that's existing to create a faster flow into your CMMS systems, IWMS systems. There's another level of complexity that exists around this world of VDC and BIM and its existing conditions. So many of us have portfolios that have legacy buildings. BIM and VDC is great when you're looking at a greenfield, but when you have an existing facility or a mix of buildings, you have to have a way of getting those same values out of the structures you already own. There are tremendous technologies available now to go through and virtualize those existing buildings, perform audits on the systems and the components that exist in there so that you can almost reverse engineer the VDC and BIM process that happens during new build to gain that same sort of value out of it. So when we're thinking about VDC and BIM, I do want you to think about both sides of the spectrum, the existing facilities, the new facilities, and then the understanding that there's a tremendous amount of information being developed at the very beginning stages before a facility even exists I'm interested in learning the questions that you would like to ask from the facility management perspective that'll drive value in the exchange of that data.
That was great. So just going to ask a quick follow-up question in terms of, new construction versus renovation versus, is it worth putting in a BIM model or a digital twin for an existing building if there's no renovation?
This is a great question. And I think that value really comes down to providing an ROI, right? And it's something that in a lot of cases, unfortunately, I experience on the back end. And there's a discrepancy between ROI. We have clients that come to us and they want to accomplish a completely smart building. They come in with a almost fully baked idea of what they want on the back end without understanding the cost or the impact of developing that. Those typically don't go very well because the pocketbook doesn't typically carry enough to get you exactly where you want to be in this smart building. On the other side of it, there's almost a learning stage where if you enter into any sort of renovation, retrofit, and you ask the questions about what can I gain out of this? Here's how I'm going to operate that space. What kind of processes, technologies can I implement during the construction process to derive value? At that point, you understand what your value is, and it helps you then craft a solution that works within your cost. Some groups that are really good to get into that conversation are going to be the architects, your designers. Vast majority of these individuals are very well educated into what's possible, and they can at least help you down the path of guiding which questions to ask. But you do have to come to the table with what you want to accomplish, not necessarily the how, but the what.
Great answer, thank you. So Daniel, I think you actually introduced me to Ted, and you used to be like, the #1 BIM go-to guy and took over the BIM working group. And you've had a bit of a voyage. You've migrated over to Schneider Electric and really wanted to talk about IoT and sustainability. What's going on with that? I mean, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, fantastic. So just to build on what Ted's talking about and Ted's question, there's a natural evolution that's really being embraced, right, by many organizations that are realizing that the information that they've always wanted to capture is really readily available. There's plenty of folks out there through the design, construction, and commission process that can capture this information that really provides meaningful insight, right, to building facilities and operations management. So where does that tie into IoT and sustainability? Well, in order to measure something, right, we have to have sensors. We have this ability now through a broader sustainability goal that's happening at the business level. Businesses are looking at how can I increase performance? How can I reduce my carbon footprint? How can I reduce energy costs? Because when we talk about sustainability, that's really kind of where we're going. And the key to all of that is data. So for organizations to look internally and say, okay, what is it about my operation that I need to capture for information? How can I capture it? And when can I capture it? So being able to capture this information at the very beginning with a business plan in mind of how you're going to use that information is significant. And I think we've really crossed over that threshold now where this was so bleeding edge before that there's so many use cases and it's proliferating really around the globe in many places where businesses are able to look at the information. They're able to quantify within their own organization what is it they're trying to do. How can I save money? How does change management come into place, right? And again, what kind of information can I capture? So simple things like being able to capture occupancy within a space, being able to know when and where people are within the space, how that space operates, and then to be able to have your systems, your smart systems that are controlled through this IoT, Internet of Things, right? To be able to define what are those sustainability goals, how do I wrap that into the occupancy or the use? Again, for example, being able to turn off the ventilation system within a space if it's not being occupied. to be able to turn off lights within the space if it's not being occupied. To precondition, everybody experienced that, I'm sure, when you checked in here. You checked in, you went to your room, and your room already had the AC on, right? It was comfortable. These are the type of experiential motivators that drive business, but that's only possible if we're using this type of technology, this Internet of Things technology, right? To be able to take these sensors, to activate through a command and control system how your systems should operate, and then to actively react, right? So that doesn't even touch upon predictive maintenance or preventative maintenance. This is another backbone of the sustainability curve, right, that really happens. Predictive maintenance was always discussed as, some unicorn riding in. Everybody really liked the idea, but how do I actually make that happen? Well, you make that happen by capturing data from these systems. And so many manufacturers now are building equipment that have the ability to self-correct, to analyze, right, and to control themselves. So it's not just one control system that's a piece of software. You literally have devices that are auto-controlling themselves. Now, what does that mean for facilities management, operations, workplace? Well, that means that you can understand and control the experience. You can control your energy consumption in ways that were never imagined before, right? To be able to say, I can significantly reduce my operating costs through a preventative maintenance schedule or a predictive maintenance schedule, that is informing me on a minute-by-minute basis. How well are my pieces of equipment operating? How much energy am I actually consuming? What's going on in the spaces that I need to control? And then how do I put that into an analytics program to then reach into the future and say, this is how it's going to happen in the springtime. This is how it's going to happen in the fall. This is how it's going to happen at this conference with this many people, right? I can project my costs, which means I can also negotiate with my utility companies for better rates, right? I can put in place different technologies like new energy landscape, photovoltaics, wind. I can put control systems in there to take advantage of all of these technologies in the most appropriate way. The sun's not always shining and the wind's not always blowing, right? So how do we take this and incorporate it, again, into a business strategy? And I wrote this down. Thank you for pulling your notebook out, Ted, because I wasn't going to pull out cards. But I knew I wasn't going to remember this. The environmental and social governance score, right, indicates that businesses have a 4.7 times higher operating margins and lower volatility in not only their resourcing, so their staffing, but then with the global supply chain problems that we're having now, to be able to actually acquire equipment, replacement equipment, but a 4.7 times higher profitability just by enabling these types of sustainability practices. So being able to operationalize your equipment, being able to operationalize your staff with your equipment. So you have all of these contributing factors coming in. I don't know.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Okay.
I know Ted's writing things down, and he's going to want to say things about that, but I'm going to give Colette a moment to talk about some of the things we've seen in workplace technologies. We've done the building envelope, but what do we need to manage? And when we partnered up with I think it's a great story.
No, it's terrific. I had a discussion with someone the other day who said, we've been talking about BIM since the 1970s. So you think about that progression in our industry and why it has taken so long to get where we're at. And we're starting to see this acceleration in the workplace environment. Some of it's just by the pandemic and the environment we're in, and this drive and this sensation for employees and what they need, right, and what they want, and retaining that talent. So organizations are now looking at technology, but looking at a way of how do you serve the employee, but how do you also understand their needs? So we're seeing a variety of solutions come into play, more technology dollars being spent around visitor management, climate, safety, all of those things are coming together, and that acceleration is really happening, which is pretty exciting. If you think about, 80 to 90% of the buildings are below 50,000 square feet. That's a tough business case to close when you're implementing technology. So many of them are looking at more holistically across their portfolio, but how do you serve employees, when they're at home, when they come in the office, Are they booking larger conference rooms, smaller conference rooms? What sensors are you using? And there's such a variety of sensors, whether it's Wi-Fi or infrared or thermal, and really understanding which one is the best that meets your organization for what you're trying to accomplish. So we're seeing companies take a step back and say, what is our technology roadmap? What do we have today? What do we actually need over the next 2 to 3 years? What's the data governance around that? What type of data do I need? How often do I need it? How do I manage it? Who should touch it? All of those things come together, and then they look for solutions. And when you think about PropTech, there's some sites that have 9,000 PropTech companies that are listed. And so maybe a third of those are actually VC funded. So many are privately funded, they're bootstrapped, and there's such a variety of those solutions that are solving for a particular pain point. And so when you think about the pain point of an organization and choosing the right technology, that technology may be acquired by an IW&S firm, as an example. As they think about, historically, they were looking at a CMMS system, how to manage, and now all of a sudden they've got this employee experience. And what's the front end of that tool? How do the employees interact with that tool? How do they book their space? And how does that technology integrate so you get the best view to help you predict predictive analytics in the future? So it's pretty exciting in the sense of all of the technology that's available. How do you choose that technology, and then how do you integrate it to meet your business needs?
Excellent. I think, one of the things that we've heard you mention, the 10,000 PropTech companies, and some of the feedback we've had over the last 2, 3, 4 years is, so what do I do? Do I get a new CMMS? Do I get an IWMS? What do I do? One of the things that we did was because sifting through 10,000 companies too much, was we just started a directory of technology providers that are vetted. It's on the beta website, and it's vetted by your peers. I think that it's a good resource, definitely worth looking at. Needs during a changing environment, articulating needs. Susan, what have you seen with the people and organizations you've been working with in terms of how have they been working through this, and what are they thinking of doing in the future?
Sure. So it's been a very interesting time with COVID in terms of, are our needs today and our needs in the future still going to be the same? So right now we're actually seeing a lot of our clients look at the different scenarios and think about, literally every scenario could be the future scenario because we just don't know. So how are we thinking about incorporating a third space, flexible space? How do we think about incorporating our own space and our lease space? And as you think about these different space types, how do we actually manage that portfolio? What's that O&M behind that look like? And what kinds of data, what are the outcomes that we actually need and want from a technology perspective? So there's a lot of varying conversations that are happening, and I think a lot of clients are still trying to think about, what are our needs and how do we articulate those needs? So I think many of us here have seen a lot of different surveys that either our HR teams or our real estate and facilities teams have been sending out to different employees just to get a feel for, all right, where are employees' mindsets and emotions actually at? Are they being productive? Are they being happy? Can we retain them? And then secondly, with this information, how does that feed into how do we have a space that serves them? So is that our own space? Is that a space that's part of our space, but not within the continuity, not within the portfolio of which we're actively having our own people operate that? So we're talking about like flexible space, we're talking about smaller hub spaces. So when you think about all of these different space needs, how do you actually have a technology that incorporates that? So some companies are looking at visitor management systems. Does it make sense to have the same system across all of these different locations so we know which employees are serving, which ones aren't? Or is it enough for us to actually just work with our IT team to see where are people actually hooking in and tying into our locations? How often are people looking in on those spaces? So it's a long way of saying there's a lot of ways that IT is supporting the facilities and real estate world. It's still evolving, And the importance of the technology that you look is really having a sense of what is that outcome, what do you need that data for? Because data for data's sake is a lot of information, but until you actually know how to utilize it and what you're capturing it for, it becomes a little bit difficult to make it meaningful and impactful.
So I'm going to kind of ask the same question of everyone, and then we'll start cross-talking. So articulating needs in changing environment, Ted, and/or what can go wrong? What has gone wrong from what you've seen in terms of processes over the last couple of years or technology implementation?
Great question. So what can go wrong? I think really a lot of what can go wrong is I place it at the feet of expectation setting. And a lot of that drives down to those assessments of what you are looking for as a facility, what kind of benefit you want to get out of it, and then setting the expectations through questioning and that experience with your designers on what's the best way to get there. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity that a lot of our clients end up getting because they just want 2D floor plans. They say, I just really need to understand the exact conditions of the layout so that I can start planning for return to work. And we understand that's going to be different. And even something as simple as that, which you think is disconnected from a workspace technology's perspective, can be leveraged as an opportunity to really start to embrace the fundamentals, that foundation to begin building your smart space and integrating technology. The 2D floor plan example, you can go about the traditional process of having someone come in and use a disto and measure it out and create a CAD file for you that is simple 2D, very little information beyond just the dimensional accuracy from a top-down view. But there's also an opportunity there for almost the same price to have someone produce, let's say, a 3D laser scan, 360 photo virtual tour of the facility. Now you're still getting your fundamental baseline need, that 2D floor plan, that template created, but at the same time you have this rich information that now exists as a database for you to build on later. A lot of the sensor-driven information requires some form of a spatial representation that's accurate reflection of the facility itself. 2D is great. If you can get 3D, it just gives you that much more value. And if you can do it for a cost of something you're already investing in, which is going to be that floor plan, why wouldn't you go ahead and take that step? So the mistake that I see is that the expectations not being aligned can be both ends. It can be that I don't understand what my expectations should be for this initial work that I need to have done that I've always historically had done a certain way. And then there's also the expectation that we can achieve something that's so science fiction that we've seen in the movies that we come in and we're let down when we get there because either A, it's too expensive, or B, it's not functional within the way that we manage the facilities on a day-to-day.
Great set of answers and observations. What could go wrong? What has gone wrong?
Oh, for me?
Yes. Sorry.
Sorry. I think there are a lot of things that can go wrong and do go wrong. I think some of them are preventable and some of them are not. From my perspective, what we see quite often is there are not internally aligned expectations within different functional groups who are stakeholders. So you may have an HR group, an IT group, facilities and real estate groups, and one group will be a really strong proponent of something. They'll go through the whole exercise of building out the use case, selecting the technology, installing and implementing the technology, but it never gets to that complete state of everything's onboarded. We can now have that data. There's sometimes what we see is a misunderstanding or misalignment gap, whether it's through your partners or with the IT team, where that final milestone of how do we actually get the technology we wanted invested in online up and running, is the cybersecurity risk, is the InfoSec, did that actually come together and tie together? So it's that last mile hurdle that we typically thought is already all set and all cleared out, actually runs into final road bumps towards the end. And that's where we think a lot of for planning, pre-planning, and better communication between all parties involved so that the outcome, and to Ted's point earlier, that people know what the expectations ought to be up front to know what success looks like.
Daniel, I know you got to follow up to that.
Yeah. So, great being the enemy of good, right? And having realistic expectations. Again, understanding who your business is, what your business goals are. So many times people want to boil the ocean, right? I have to have the standard in the process that goes from the very beginning of all time to the very end of all time, right? And it's unmanageable. It's not something that people can really do. And those are one-off projects that really happen, right, over a period of time. So to be able to set expectations, realistic expectations, as Susan and Ted have been mentioning, around your business, what can go wrong? If you spend all of this time putting together a process that you haven't vetted with the people that are doing the work on a project level, then you certainly can fall down at the end of this and not understand how your process is aligned with your business goals. Being able to take the benefit of a project and incorporating training in for your teams, incorporating your subconsultants, your contractors, your architects, your engineers, your entire maintenance staff in a small plan of, well, here are the 8 things, the 8 pieces of data that mean the most to me that can have impact to my facilities team and my purchasing and my sustainability goals that I can capture during design, construction, and commissioning. Right? Maybe I activate an M&V plan, a measuring and verification plan, but so many times something as simple as monitoring warranty information. It's turnover, handover on that is often poorly done. The management of that is often poorly executed. And how many times have you gotten to the end of the expected life or something fails only to find out that your warranty has been up and your unexpected costs, right, are there, right? So now I have to replace something where I could have captured some information, used that as step 1, and then built upon it. I think that happens many times, and that's a trap that many folks fall into.
Fair enough. Colette, I'm going to ask you the same question. What can go wrong? What has gone wrong?
I was just like hearing from technologists about what goes wrong. I think that's the first time I've heard on a panel. So I think it's terrific. I think where we see a lot of challenges is really understanding why the technology was decided upon to begin with. So really understanding if it's for an employee, and their services, what's the employee journey? What are those things that, are the touch points of the employee, and what do they need? So from the moment they walk through the door to the moment they go home, what enables that technology? And then as you're implementing it, there's certainly, various things that could go wrong. Teams not communicating, is it solving what you really need? The data may not be there. How do you obtain that data? But at the end, is the employee going to use it? Have you thought about the change management? Because so many times we see technology implemented, we're going to do a new work order system, it's going to be great, it's going to be mobile, all the employees will have access, and then the employees don't even use it. So really thinking all the way through to the end user and what their expectations are and how easy it is for them to use along the way, I think is certainly an area that we've seen falter.
Amen on the change management.
Any other comments on what Colette just shared?
I'm sorry?
I was asking them if they had any comments on what you just said. Sorry. So, Ted, you got a lot of notes there. I mean, I can see his notes. So I don't know if you want to share some of those or you want me to throw something else at you.
No, let's go for a little bit. I'm chatting as we're going.
All right. So, Vdc and Bim, good IoT deployment. Hopefully that'll make us more sustainable. Ted, how can that data best transfer into workplace technologies? How do we operationalize on that?
So it depends on what your requirements are. And I think that's a big challenge in the industry right now is the lack of standardization, wide adoption of standardization. I mean, there are options out there for sure. But I'll bring it back to a more, I think, finite example. Right, in my house, I had this great idea about a year ago. So right as we're entering into the pandemic, and I think, you know what, I preach this at work. I'm super tech with all these commercial buildings that we work on, but my house it lacks some of the intelligence of these other facilities. So I'm thinking I'm gonna integrate a bunch of IoT into my house. So I do a bunch of research, I get cross-eyed over it, and I think that it's difficult to move down the commercial path. I mean, the residential path is just as crazy. So I'm looking at all the different technologies, and I realize that, okay, I really have to pick a certain direction because I need to focus on interoperability, I need to focus on data exchange, I need to have some sort of a hub that everything feeds into. And I got to a point where I was convinced whatever choice I was gonna make was the wrong one, and I was right about that. So, I moved down the path only to find out that we are still a little bit immature, I think, in being able to really roll out a holistic, interoperable environment of systems. Can't do it at my house. It's very difficult to do commercially. So that's why I really focus on the expectation, part of this discussion is that I don't know that we are mature enough in the smart building space, and you all, I hope, have a different perspective on this. But I think if you were to focus on the value that you want to derive from the experience, whether that is controlling the environmental condition pieces, whether it's better management of your workspace and sensors around utilization as you're exploring this come back to work environment, and you want to provide people an opportunity to return to the space, but you also want to manage it and get more value out of it, understanding that we're not going to have the residency that we typically have had, pre-pandemic. So, a lot of the questioning that goes into this is let's highlight the biggest value props, and then let's focus on a solution that embraces and embodies those, because I don't know that there is an easy button on setting your data up to be successful in any particular, thought that you have in the future, or any typical, or any use case that you come up with. I think you really need to be finite in your expectations, drive in a way that you're thinking a little bit bigger, and then, really manage the system so that you can focus on interoperability, because there are some out there that are more friendly than others.
Daniel, thoughts on that?
Boy, there was a lot there. Yeah. I think setting expectations are really good. It's an interesting juxtaposition we're in now, where before it was, how do we get the Mars kind of technology? There was great things being marketed and lots of technology companies talking about great things. And everybody was very eager to move towards that. But now we have more technology, and we're not able to use it because our business can't manage the change. We can't manage expectations. We don't really understand. And I don't even want to get on cybersecurity, right? Because that's a whole other session. But something everybody here really needs to pay attention to, for sure, especially in this IoT world. So I guess I would echo what everybody here has said, right? I think the common denominator is more around how are you going to organize as a group, and how are you going to set your expectations? The technology's there. Maybe it's maturing in different spaces at a different rate. Different folks have different operational plans to be able to execute this. There are lots of organizations, sustainable organizations, that are promoting this. You see a rise in the EUI, Energy Usage Index, which is kind of taking the next level of LEED. Right, LEED was great for everyone to put together a set of sustainable goals, but then there was, okay, now we've got all these goals. How do we measure that? How do we know, right? And did we actually achieve what we set out to do? So that really only happens when you start implementing this type of strategy, right? For you to be able to collect that information. But again, I say it does come back down to setting expectations, understanding your business. How do you implement this with your team? And not turn this great, multi-million-dollar investment that you may put in place into essentially a paperweight that nobody uses. Yeah.
Colette, any thoughts on operationalizing or making it more efficient to take advantage of all this data that's getting thrown at us?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. The data, so I think the question of standardization is good. Really understanding what data you need and where is it? Is it within the HR systems? Is it within the IT? And then really, who owns that? So we're seeing many, many companies, not just focus on data standards, but really thinking about what's the standard that they need across the globe for their own organization, and where is that data? How do they secure that data? And then how do they use that data? And in some cases, they're using their own BI dashboards, and others are using performance management tools. And they're pulling data from different systems and kind of creating, to some degree, their own bespoke solution on really understanding how the space is being utilized. So I think the governance piece of that is what many organizations overlook. So they tend to go at technology and say it's going to solve every problem that I have, but then once they start implementing it, they realize they don't have a data governance process across their organization and across departments on how to use that data.
Good point. Susan, same question. How do we take advantage of all this data that's getting thrown at us? I mean, how do we operationalize it? How do we make our operations more efficient, more sustainable from your perspective?
So I think a part of it is really knowing your audience. So you have a set of data, you have a set of technologies. What is this technology? What is the aim of the technology? Who is it ultimately going to serve? Like, for example, if you're talking about a tenant app, that's for your tenants, those are for your employees, and whatever you build within those apps or functionalities, are employees, are your end users actually going to use it? And the same for things that are going to make your FM teams more efficient, for items that are going to to provide your either procurement or your energy teams, your sustainability teams with that information to be able to feed up to whether it's your corporate sustainability report or other information, knowing your audience and what they need so that you can aggregate and pull together that information can then move you towards that next step of operationalizing it.
Thank you. So we've got a little time left. I'm going to kind of rewind to the beginning. What would you like to talk about? And this is not quite Q&A yet, but if you had one thing tied to workplace technologies or BIM or VDC or flying robots, which are real now, what would you guys like to talk about? I can't believe Ed Buckley's being shy. Do we have anybody online that's being...
Oh my gosh, the microphone thanks me. Thanks, everybody. So I had a different question, but I'm finding myself now reacting to the comment earlier. There are 9,000 potential PropTech providers in the market. I actually looked at a document this morning for a presentation, what difference a year makes. It was 2,500 last year. So we're seeing an exponential increase in the number of companies entering this space. My question is, let's say from a management perspective, because I know we have a lot of FM providers here, we have a lot of clients here. So in this incredibly complex environment, who's the system integrator? I'd love to get an opinion on who should be the systems integrator in this incredibly complex environment.
Yeah, I'd start with a little bit. So of those PropTech companies, I think it was Freshcode that's interviewed CEOs, and 54% of those CEOs said they're focused on the office environment, 31% on hospitality. So it leaves an enormous part of the market underserved. So if you think about it from the context of what solutions are within those thousands of potential companies providing solutions, thinking about the integration of those. So if many of them are in office, if you think about the integration of the office side, there is a school of thought that said it may be the historical IWMS providers, right? Because they have the basic foundation of a CMMS, they have basic foundation of space management. It's really those user interfaces and those pain points that a lot of that technology will solve for. But I think you're probably closest to this. I mean, you have both the hardware and the software side to enable that true integration. And I do think you need the capabilities of both of those to do that.
Absolutely. So system integrator, obviously you can't ignore your IT group, right? Because everything around all this IoT world, any of this information, whether it's deploying software on mobile devices for your teams, or you're capturing data from your facility, from these live sensors, having a strong cybersecurity program is essential. You have to have it. You know, what I've seen time over time, though, is you may have a very strong software provider that it's their business, right, to help sell you their software. So they will have gone through the competitive landscape of what do other tools do, how do I integrate with other best-in-class systems, and what can be some best-in-class workflow processes. So if you have a very strong provider, they can certainly provide that input into your team. If you have a motivated executive team who really believes in the mission, right, then having that sponsorship all the way down is really it's significant. You have to have it. But I would say if you don't have a project team and a dedicated team within your own group, then finding a very strong consultant, there are many, many out there that can do this. And again, that's their business, to look at the competitive landscape, to take the breadth of knowledge that they gain from client over client over client and all of these different domains, to bring it into your department to be able to help integrate that. And it's not an easy thing. I mean, especially with that exponential bump, you have software to software to software. Everybody likes to throw buzzwords around like, well, I got this REST API, and that solves world hunger apparently, right? But then there's data, right? And there's information and there's structures, and some applications can export information. Some have APIs, some don't. What is the structure of that information, and how do you go about actually taking, again, what is, I think everybody here has identified as the business value, and then coming back with a practical plan. And again, I guess to come back to your question directly, being able to find that technology consultant that can help your team. Ultimately, I think your organization needs to own it, though. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just add, yes, that is an incredibly hard question. And secondly, I think there isn't a one-size-fits-all. But what I would also like to echo is it is very important to really have that executive level sponsorship, because then you have that underlying vision that everyone within the team can unite behind, whether it's one team or multiple project teams. You have that executive sponsorship for that vision of what you're driving towards. Secondly, I would like to add, it's also important to have not only the systems integration piece of it, but the process integration piece of it. So who or which functional groups own which parts of the process, and is there an end-to-end process for which everybody understands, and it has that workflow that's really clearly identified and knowable to all. If that piece isn't completely clear, then you can put in all the systems you want, but you're going to have a lot of additional obstacles that you might not have intended to.
So I'm going to invite everybody to learn from construction and what we've made mistakes on the integration front. So if I look at integration from a perspective of technology, I can embody that with BIM and VDC and what occurred within the construction environment over the last decade. So there was a heavy investment in BIM without really understanding the implication of it. And when we rolled this out in construction businesses, it, in a lot of cases, stepped on the turf of other organizations, right? Because there's, at the end of the day, two sides of the implementation. There's a technical implementation, and then there's the business implementation, which is the process, the people, the cross, groups. And what we didn't do really well was we didn't involve all the stakeholders. So my advice would be to get everyone that could potentially have some sort of an impact involved in this, because if you don't have everyone championing it and providing their perspective, then you're going to have folks that are opposed to it just by the nature of that interaction. Within construction, we launched BIM, and then we evolved that into VDC to become even more robust. And what we didn't realize was that we were really walking in the turf of IT, traditional IT, who became very defensive of their ownership over the systems. That made everything much more difficult to move forward. Even the smallest effort became very obstructed by these IT groups, which really were looking out for the best of the business, but at the end of the day were hurt that they weren't involved in that initial discussion, right? In addition to that, then we started moving down the path of prefabrication through virtual construction, and this began to impact operational groups. So now we're perceived as telling the people that were out there in the field how to do their jobs, right? Not a whole lot different than if you were to implement a system within the facility management world, and you have people that are out there to do the maintenance jobs that are now resisting because who are you to come in and tell me how to do what I've been doing for 20, 30 years? So having someone that's a leader within that group become involved is going to pay dividends to you. And then we also had, beyond the IT and the operations, was the executive team, who really has to be bought in and driving this. So what construction is beginning to do right now is it's shifting. And we don't only have a VDC department within construction companies today, but we're beginning to see an innovation group start. And this innovation group isn't focused on necessarily coming up with a new way to construct, but it is focusing on bridging stakeholders together to implement the things that are cross-functional. So when it comes to implementation of sensors or IoT or smart buildings, my advice to everybody in this room is to build a group of stakeholders that all can come and have their voices heard, because you're going to get a lot further faster, and honestly, you're going to recognize a lot of opportunity and value add from different perspectives that you might not share from your seat.
I can't believe our hour is almost over. We've got about 3 minutes left. Mary, do we have any questions from anyone online? They're all like, we have questions over here. The heck with them. We're all here now.
Actually, it's more a request for opinion. So we all know that artificial intelligence is becoming more and more entwined, if you will, in our society. So visionaries, 5 years from now, what is the impact on AI and how we manage and run facilities, in your opinion?
Okay. Yeah, all right. So AI is still only as good as the model that trains it, right? So there's still this whole promise of what can it be. There's a lot of misunderstanding between machine learning and AI. Machine learning being human-developed algorithms versus, right, AI being able to take that algorithm and expound upon it with its own knowledge base. So where is it going to be in 5 years? I think you're going to see self-automated buildings, right? Even more so than you are now. You're going to see the automation and expectation of spaces and how they react to people. But again, I don't know that it's going to be within 5 years, this panacea of within 10 years. Yeah, probably 10 years. I would agree with that. Yeah. So, again, AI being able to be used in robotic vehicles to be able to go out and capture information on a building site, to be able to capture usage and intelligence from the folks that are using the building, tying that back into automated contracts, right? So the whole blockchain technology, which still kind of, it's been put on the down low because everybody's thinking of Bitcoins, right? But smart contracts being able to be tied into actual performance in building operations, I think you'll see that for sure.
I would agree. I would only preface it, there's a difference between the development of the AI and the implementation of it. We're slow to implement in our industry, so we're going to see some progression in the next 5 years around the technology and certainly the predictability of how people use it. But broad-based implementation, I think, is certainly going to take us a while.
Yeah.
30 seconds, you want to? Yes, okay, go.
Great question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My question is actually directed to Colette. You touched on something that's near and dear to my heart. It's a very timely discussion on the change management and the rollout of that for technology. So everyone is upgrading their technology to better assist with remote working. And they're trying their best to kind of roll out that technology in a way that's efficient for the company. Today, where you're getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails and you're constantly in back-to-back meetings, they're rolling out videos. So I'd like to understand, I mean, we don't have much time for emails, much less videos. So in your experience, can you give an example of a change management program that worked really well?
Yeah, I think some organizations have even OD departments that really focus on that. But to your point, what technology is being implemented, right? You could have visitor management systems, you could have desk booking, conference room bookings, concierge services. So really understanding what's being implemented, how those intersect, and understanding the eventual employee hesitation to using those technologies, inclusive of Zoom meetings, right? We all kind of stepped into Zoom meetings overnight, and many of us embraced it just as part of that change, right? It was a velocity of change that we accepted. And so now coming back into the office, it's happening at a slower pace, and people are trying to understand, okay, if I have meetings where I'm in the office but half my team is still at home, how do I interact with them? Which conference room should I book to make that most efficient? And I think to the earlier point of really understanding that employee journey, having that mapped out, and then understanding where those points would be, that would be a pain point for an employee to make sure that you work through the change management. And there are experts out there, consultants and others that really, you can bring in to help you think through that journey and help you put an entire, change management plan together.
Yeah. And just quickly, I would also add having change champions within different levels and different business units within your groups to really champion that. Some of our clients are also looking at on-site ambassadors to help on-site employees roll those out as well.
Okay, we have one more question. If you can answer it in maybe 1 minute. William asked, are we seeing standard communications between technologies that allow for a dashboard that can bring different equipment and manufacture data points together in one place?
I think I heard most of that. We're looking for, can you say that one more time?
Are we seeing standard communications between technologies that allow for a dashboard that can bring different equipment and manufacture data points together in one place?
Sure, I'll do a shameless plug. Schneider's doing that all over the place, right? They're building hardware that's fully integrated, that again builds its own standards, will adapt to standards dynamically, will allow your building to operate, right, in that same way. So smart technology, smart equipment that's driving back that sustainability and carbon reduction. So absolutely it's happening, and I think you're seeing also, to extend upon that, most modern technology providers now have all embraced a cloud infrastructure. They've all embraced a scalable infrastructure that will allow for open communication. There are many standards out there that people have tried to put in place. I think people are still trying to do the one ring rules them all strategy of we're going to get every technology and every historical technology under one umbrella, some ubiquitous data store. But that's a long road to go. But I think technology providers, instead of trying to provide the one data standard, are really focusing more on how do I just make myself interoperable, and then relying on change management champions, relying on the individual owner and their groups to be able to manage how that integrates. My opinion, anyway.
Please give our panel a round of applause. Thank you guys so much.